Lonely rancher found a young girl in chains with a note, "Betrayal never sleeps."
The desert was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that made a man hear his own heart beat louder than the wind. Elias Boone rode slow across the dry land, his old horse kicking up small clouds of dust with every step. The sun was low, red on the horizon, burning the sky in colors of fire. Elias liked this time of day. He was a man used to silence. His ranch was small, his days simple. Wake with the sun, feed the animals, mend what needed mending, and ride the edges of his land before dark. There was comfort in routine, predictable, safe. But safe never lasts forever. As he passed a stretch of land with scattered rocks and a dying oak stump, Elias heard something unusual. At first he thought it was the wind catching on loose wire, but then it came again. Clink, clink, clink. Metal. Chains. He pulled on the reins and his horse stopped. The desert air felt heavier all of a sudden, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. Elias narrowed his eyes, scanning the land. That's when he saw her. Not 20 yards from the stump, half hidden by tall grass and dust, was a figure. Small, still, broken-looking. As Elias drew closer, the shape sharpened into something human. A girl. She was chained to the oak stump by her wrists and ankles. Iron cuffs cut into her skin, and the chains rattled when she shifted weakly. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised and dirty, her face half hidden behind strands of tangled hair. She looked young, too young to be left out here to die. Above her head, nailed into the rotten wood, was a rough board. The words carved into it with a knife were jagged, angry, almost bleeding into the wood. Betrayal never sleeps. Elias froze. The message stared back at him like a curse. He looked around quickly, eyes sharp on the ridges, the rocks, the shadows. The desert was wide open, but he felt watched. Betrayal never sleeps. Was it a warning, a threat, a judgment on her, or on him for even finding her? The girl stirred, a low sound escaping her throat. It wasn't even a word, just a whimper, soft, pained, desperate. Elias felt something twist in his chest. He climbed down from his horse, boots crunching against the dry dirt. His hand rested on the handle of his rifle, though he didn't raise it. The closer he walked, the clearer her suffering became. The skin around her wrists was raw from struggling against the chains. Her lips were cracked from thirst. Her body sagged like it had given up days ago. Still, when she lifted her head, even barely, her eyes met his. Dark eyes, wide with fear but holding on to a spark, a plea. Elias stopped a few feet away. His mind was racing. Who would chain a girl out here? Why the sign? Why her? He could ride away, pretend he never saw, safer that way. His life was simple because he kept it that way. He didn't invite trouble, and this was trouble. The girl let out another sound, softer this time, almost like a breath that was too heavy to carry. Elias swallowed hard, his jaw tight. The note above her seemed to whisper the words back at him, cruel and cold. Betrayal never sleeps. For a moment, Elias Boone stood between silence and choice. The desert had given him peace for years, but now it gave him this, a chained girl, a cursed message, and the weight of a decision that could not be undone. And when she whimpered again, weaker than before, Elias knew. Trouble or not, he couldn't leave her.
Elias stepped closer, the heat of the desert thick around him. His fingers brushed the cold iron of the chains. They were tight, cruel things, meant not just to hold, but to hurt. Whoever put her here wanted her to suffer. The girl flinched when his shadow fell over her. Her eyes darted from his face to the knife at his belt, then back again. She didn't beg, she didn't fight. She only watched, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, waiting for him to choose. Elias slid the knife from its sheath. His hand was steady, though his chest tightened. "Easy," he muttered, as much to himself as to her. The first cut was at her wrists. The rope wound tight around iron cuffs, biting into her skin. He saw the raw flesh beneath, blistered from sun and struggle. When the knife slipped through, she dropped suddenly, her knees hitting the dirt. Elias caught her by the shoulder before she collapsed completely. Then he moved to her ankles. The chains rattled with each tug. He worked slow, careful, his breath heavy in the dry air. When the final knot gave way, the weight of the iron clattered to the ground. The sound rang out across the desert like a warning bell. The girl sagged against him, trembling, too weak to stand. Elias hooked an arm under her, lifting her light body with ease. She was little more than bone and dust, fragile as a bird caught in a storm. He glanced once more at the wooden board nailed into the stump. The words, "Betrayal never sleeps," cut deep in the wood, sharp as teeth. His gut twisted. Who wrote it? Who was betrayed? And why chain her here as proof? He shook the thought from his head, one thing at a time. Carrying her to his horse, he set her gently in the saddle and swung up behind. She didn't resist. Her head rested weakly against his chest, her hair tangled and coarse against his chin. He clicked his tongue, and the old horse started back toward the ranch.
The ride was quiet, but not the peaceful quiet Elias knew. It was the kind of quiet that listens, like the desert itself had ears. He kept his eyes on the ridges, half expecting to see a rider appear, a gun raised, a shadow claiming the note was meant as a trap. But no one came. Only the long stretch of sand and rock, the low cry of a hawk, and the fading light of the sun. By the time he reached his ranch, the girl was half conscious, her breaths thin and shallow. Elias carried her inside, laying her down on his cot. She stirred faintly, lips moving, but no sound came out. He fetched water, tipping a little against her cracked lips. She swallowed greedily, then coughed, the sound sharp but alive. Elias placed a blanket over her small frame, watching her shiver, though the room was warm. The chains. He couldn't stand the sight of them. He dragged them from the saddle, heavy links scraping the ground, and flung them into the far corner of the barn. The noise echoed like thunder, but even as they lay in a heap, Elias swore he could still hear their rattle in his head. The note burned brighter in his memory. The words seemed to follow him into the house, whispering over the creak of the floorboards. Betrayal never sleeps. Night fell. The wind picked up outside, brushing across the wooden walls like fingers searching for cracks. Elias sat in the chair by the door, rifle across his knees. The girl slept uneasily, shifting, murmuring things he couldn't catch. Then, just as the lantern flame dipped low, a sound carried through the night. Not the wind, not the coyotes, a faint creak of leather, a step on gravel. Elias held his breath, eyes sharp on the door. Nothing followed, only silence, then the wind again. He told himself it was nothing. Still, his grip on the rifle stayed tight. Behind him, the girl stirred. Her lips parted, and for the first time, words slipped through. "They'll come for me." Her voice was weak, cracked, but the warning in it was clear. Elias turned his head slowly. Her eyes were half open, staring at the ceiling, as if she were caught between dream and memory. "They'll come for me," she whispered again, before sinking back into restless sleep. Elias sat frozen, the rifle heavy in his lap. Doubt pressed hard against his chest. Had he saved an innocent? Or had he just invited death to his doorstep?
Morning broke pale and quiet over the ranch. The first light slid across the dry boards of Elias Boone's small house, touching the girl's face where she lay wrapped in his blanket. She stirred but did not wake, her breaths shallow, her body still weak. Elias moved slow, careful not to wake her. He fed the horse, checked the fence line, tried to slip back into his routine. But the silence felt different now, heavy, like the air carried a secret. When he came back inside, the girl was sitting up. Her eyes followed him, sharp but unsure, like a wild creature trapped between fight and flight. Elias poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, trembling, but did not speak. "You got a name?" Elias asked after a moment. She looked away, said nothing. Elias let out a slow breath. "Fine. Till you tell me, I'll call you Ruth." Her eyes flicked toward him, then back to the floor. No protest, no agreement, just silence. The day passed in small steps. Elias cooked beans and bread, set a plate by her side. She ate little, nibbling like a sparrow too cautious to trust the food. Her movements were tight, wary. Every creak of the floorboard made her shoulders flinch. Elias pretended not to notice. He kept busy, patching a loose board on the roof, mending tack, oiling his rifle. All the while he felt her eyes on him when she thought he wasn't looking, watching, measuring. By evening the ranch felt different. The familiar walls seemed closer, the silence thicker. Elias lit a lantern and sat at the table, sharpening his knife. The rasp of steel on stone was steady, but his mind wandered to the sign, the chains, the words burned into wood. Betrayal never sleeps. Ruth, or whatever her name truly was, shifted under the blanket. Her face was pale, drawn tight. She closed her eyes, but her lips moved. At first, Elias thought she was praying. Then the words reached him. "Don't trust him," she whispered, voice low and broken. "Betrayal never sleeps." The words slithered from her like fragments of a nightmare. She twisted, caught in some dark dream, and then fell silent again, breath ragged. Elias sat still, the knife heavy in his hand. His jaw tightened. Don't trust him. Betrayal never sleeps. He looked at her, at the bruises on her wrists, the hollow hunger in her cheeks. She was just a girl. But the words, they clung to him like dust.
Later, as the lantern burned low, Elias stepped outside to breathe. The desert stretched wide and endless, stars scattered across the black sky. Usually that sight calmed him. Tonight it unsettled him. The wind carried faint sounds. A coyote howled far off. Then for a moment he thought he heard something else, a soft creak, like leather under weight, a step in the dirt. He turned quickly, eyes searching the darkness around the barn. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. Still, he kept his rifle close when he returned inside. The girl was awake now, sitting up, her blanket clutched tight. Her eyes followed him again, watchful, cautious. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Elias said, "No one's out there, just the wind." She did not answer. He sat by the door, rifle across his knees, the knife on the table behind him. The ranch was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet Elias once knew. This silence was sharp, charged, like a storm building just out of sight. The girl lay down again, eyes still open, staring into the dark. Her lips moved once more, but this time the words were almost too soft to catch. She whispered, "They'll come." Elias's hand tightened on the rifle. For the first time in years, the lonely rancher felt the walls of his world closing in. He had brought trouble home. He just didn't know yet how much.
The next morning, Elias woke before the sun, as he always did. But the silence of dawn felt sharper now, like every sound was waiting to break into something worse. He stepped outside, the cool air stinging his lungs. The ground near the barn caught his eye. He crouched low, brushing his fingers over the dirt. There, boot prints. Not his, not old. The heel still sharp, edges not yet touched by wind. Someone had been close in the night. Elias rose slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. The desert looked the same as always, but his gut told him the land had eyes. Inside, the girl stirred as he came back. She sat on the cot, hair messy, eyes heavy but watchful. Elias said nothing, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders. After breakfast, while Elias was mending a bridle out on the porch, he saw dust rising in the east. A rider. The figure grew clearer as it approached, a man in a worn coat, badge glinting faintly on his chest. A deputy. Elias laid the bridle aside and rested his hand casually on the rifle by his chair. The rider pulled up, dismounted, and tipped his hat. "Morning," the deputy said. His voice was even, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the ranch yard. "Looking for someone. Figured you might have seen her." Elias didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, heavy as the heat. Finally, he said, "I keep to myself. Don't see much." Harlan nodded, though his gaze lingered on the barn, the house, the windows. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Young girl, runaway, dangerous." He handed it to Elias. The sketch was rough, but clear enough. A young girl, hair long, face hard, eyes sharp even in black ink. It was her. Elias felt the girl's presence even from inside the house, though he didn't look toward the window. He folded the paper, his jaw tight. "Can't say I've seen her," Elias said flatly. "You sure?" the deputy pressed. "She was last spotted near Cottonwood Flats. Word is she was part of something bad. Betrayal in her blood, they say. That's not to get tangled in that." With that, Harlan mounted up and rode off, dust curling behind his horse. Elias stood still, the folded sketch heavy in his hand. When the deputy was out of sight, he crushed the paper and tossed it into the fire pit. The edges curled, blackened, turned to ash. Inside, the girl was sitting stiff on the cot, eyes fixed on him as he entered. She had heard every word. "You lied," she said softly. Elias set his rifle down and stared at her. "Why did they draw your face on a wanted sheet?" She hugged the blanket tighter, her eyes dark and unreadable. For a long time she didn't answer. The silence stretched until Elias almost turned away. Then she spoke, voice low, carrying more pain than anger. "I didn't betray them. They betrayed me." Elias's chest tightened. He searched her face, looking for truth, for cracks, for something he could hold on to. All he found was the weight of her words. He sat in the chair by the door, staring at the lantern flame flickering in the dim light. The phrase burned back into his skull like a brand. Betrayal never sleeps. And now it was on his porch, in his house, and in the dark eyes of the girl he had saved.
The barn was quiet, except for the slow creak of wood in the wind. Elias stood in the doorway, staring at the heap of iron chains he had tossed into the corner days before. They hadn't rusted yet, though the desert air would eat at them soon enough. For now, they looked alive, dark, coiled, waiting. He hated the sight of them. Every time he stepped into the barn, his eyes went there first. The sound of them hitting the dirt still rang in his head. He told himself they were just metal, nothing more. But deep down, he knew better. Chains carried stories. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. He turned. The girl, Ruth as he still called her, stood just inside the doorway. The blanket he'd given her was draped around her shoulders, her bare feet dusty against the wood. Her eyes went straight to the chains. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. She only stared. "You know who put 'em on you?" Elias asked, his voice rough from disuse. Her lips pressed together. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, quiet but steady, "The ones who swore they'd keep me safe." Elias frowned. "Family?" She shook her head. "Not blood, but they took me in, called me their own, until the land turned dry and greed came with it. Then I was the stranger again. Easier to blame the stranger." Her words hung in the air, sharp as spurs. She stepped closer to the pile, toes almost touching the cold iron. Her hand lifted, as if to reach for it, but stopped halfway, trembling. "They chained me because I spoke against them," she whispered. "Said the land wasn't theirs alone. Said we should share. They called me a traitor. Said I had betrayed them." Elias's chest tightened. He looked at her small frame, the scars still raw on her wrists, and he felt something stir inside him. Anger, maybe, or memory.
He walked past her, crouched, and picked up one of the iron cuffs. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it in his hands, the cold metal biting into his palm. "Betrayal," he muttered. "That word cuts deeper than these." Ruth's eyes shifted to him. For the first time, he saw a spark of understanding there. Elias set the cuff back down, slower this time. He wiped his hand on his trousers, as if the weight had stained him. "You ever been betrayed, Mr. Boone?" she asked softly. Elias's jaw worked. He didn't answer right away. The barn seemed to shrink around him, the shadows pressing closer. Finally, he said, "My own blood." Her eyes widened just slightly. "Brother," Elias continued. His voice was low, steady, but edged with old hurt. "Years back, we ran cattle together. Hard times came, and he took what wasn't his, sold it off, left me with nothing. When I found him, he swore he'd come back, make it right. The next morning he was gone, took my sister's horse too." His throat tightened. He hadn't spoken those words in years. Ruth didn't speak. She only stood there, listening, her eyes heavy but not pitying. Elias forced a dry laugh, though it came out bitter. "Guess we both know what betrayal feels like." For a long time, neither moved. The chains lay silent between them, but they weren't just iron anymore. They were proof. Proof of broken trust, of wounds that didn't heal, of the weight left behind when promises shattered. At last, Ruth crouched down, close enough to touch the pile. She didn't. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "Chains, remember." Elias's jaw tightened. He turned, pushing the barn door open wide to let in the light. He muttered, "Not if we burn 'em."
But even as the sun spilled across the dirt floor, he couldn't shake the feeling she was right. The chains might rust, they might burn, but the memory of them, the betrayal, lived on.
The days that followed were uneasy. The girl, Ruth, though Elias knew by now that wasn't her real name, moved about the house like a shadow. She ate little, spoke less. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would trace the scars on her wrists with her fingertips, as if trying to remind herself they were real. Elias tried to return to his routines, mending fences, watering stock, chopping wood, but nothing felt the same. Every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt like it was waiting. One afternoon, as Elias was fixing a loose board near the corral, his eyes caught a shimmer of movement on the far ridge. He stood still, hammer in hand, watching. 3 figures on horseback lingered just at the edge of sight. They didn't ride closer, they didn't turn away, they just stood, watching. By the time Elias blinked, the riders were gone, but the dust they left behind proved they had been real. That evening he walked into the barn, lantern in hand. The chains still lay in the corner, dull but not forgotten. He thought of burning them then and there, but something in him hesitated. As much as he hated them, they felt like a warning he couldn't ignore. When he stepped back into the house, Ruth was awake, sitting by the window. The lantern light caught her face, pale and sharp against the glass. She didn't turn as he entered, but her voice broke the silence.
"They're watching." Elias stopped in his tracks. "You saw them too?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "Men who ride without rest. Men who carry lies like rifles." He studied her profile, her shoulders stiff under the blanket. "What do they want?" She turned then, meeting his eyes. Her own were dark, heavy with something more than fear. "They want me chained again, or dead." Elias's jaw tightened. "Why?" For a long time she didn't answer. Then she bent forward, reaching for the dirt floor near the hearth. With her finger, she drew a crooked line, then another crossing it, then a circle. Slowly, the shape of a broken chain appeared in the dust. "They called me sister once," she whispered, "said I belonged. Then when the rains failed, they turned, said I had cursed the land, said I had betrayed them to outsiders. They carved those words, 'Betrayal never sleeps,' so everyone who saw me would believe it." Her hand trembled as she drew. "It wasn't me, it was them. They betrayed me." Elias crouched, watching the lines in the dirt. Her words sank deep into him, heavy as stone. He thought of his brother, of the herds stolen in the night, of the trust ripped apart. Betrayal. It followed men like a shadow. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint howl of coyotes. The house creaked. Ruth wiped her hand across the drawing, erasing it, as if even the shape of chains carried too much weight. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, lantern low. In the distance, far off but clear, he heard the sound of horses again. Not one, not two, several. They didn't come closer, but they didn't leave either. The desert was no longer his quiet home. It had become a hunting ground. And the words on the old wooden sign, the ones he couldn't forget, felt more alive than ever. Betrayal never sleeps.
The fire in the hearth burned low, sending soft orange light across the walls. Outside, the desert was still, but Elias knew the riders were out there, circling, waiting. The quiet pressed close, heavy as the chains that still lay in his barn. Ruth sat on the cot, her knees drawn up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She stared into the flames without blinking, her face pale and sharp in the shifting light. Elias sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands folded. He watched her for a long time, the fire snapping between them. "You've been keeping things," he said at last. His voice was steady but low. "Truth weighs more than lies, and I need to know which one I'm holding here." Ruth's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the fire. Her lips pressed tight. Silence stretched until Elias thought she'd stay locked away again. But then slowly she spoke. "My father was a man of land, not rich, not powerful, just stubborn enough to hold on to a patch of earth when others wanted it." Elias leaned back, listening. "We traded fair with settlers, shared water when we had it. But last spring, the river dried too soon. Neighbors grew hungry, angry. They said we were hiding food, said I had given our stores to outsiders." Her throat tightened. It wasn't true, but fear makes liars out of men. Her hands shook as she pulled the blanket tighter. One night, a white woman turned up dead near the creek. They said it was us. They said I had led her there. No proof, no trial, just whispers, and whispers turned to fire. She lifted her arm, showing the scars on her wrist. "They beat me, chained me, called me a traitor, said I had betrayed them to the soldiers. The sign on that tree, it was carved by men I grew up calling brothers." The flames popped, and silence filled the space between her words. Elias's chest tightened. He saw the weight in her eyes, the hurt carved deeper than any chain could cut. She had carried it alone, forced to wear betrayal like a brand. He looked down at his own hands, scarred from years of work, trembling slightly now. His turn. "My family wasn't so different," Elias said slowly. "Had a ranch, small, but ours. My brother and I ran cattle together. We worked hard, built something. But hard times came, and he chose himself over us. Sold half the herd for drink and cards. Left me with nothing but dust and shame." His jaw clenched. The words came harder now. "When raiders came one spring, I wasn't home. Came back to smoke, to ashes. My sister, 16, was trapped in the barn. I heard her crying, but I didn't go in. I waited for help. By the time I found the courage," his voice cracked, low and bitter, "it was too late." The firelight flickered across his face. He hadn't spoken that truth to anyone. Saying it now felt like cutting open a scar. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of wood. Then Ruth whispered, "You think you betrayed her?" Elias looked at her, eyes heavy. "I know I did." Her gaze was steady now, sharp through the pain. "Then you know, betrayal doesn't sleep. It lives in you, follows you, makes you doubt every step you take." He nodded once, slow. "Ain't no chain heavier." Something shifted in the silence that followed. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding. Two wounds recognizing each other. Ruth turned back to the fire,
her face softer than before. "Maybe betrayal never sleeps," she said quietly, "but maybe neither does the chance to fight it." Elias stared into the flames, the words sinking deep. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge.
The riders came at dusk, dust rising behind their horses. Elias stood on his porch, rifle across his chest, as Deputy Harlan dismounted with 2 men at his side. "You've got her," Harlan said coldly. "Hand her over." Inside, Ruth froze. She gripped the edge of the blanket, listening. Elias stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Ain't no girl here, just me." "Don't lie," Harlan snapped. His hand hovered near his revolver. "She's a traitor, a danger to us all." Ruth appeared in the doorway then, eyes dark but steady. For the first time, she didn't hide. Harlan sneered. "There she is." The first shot cracked the silence. Elias fired quick, dropping one of the men. Gunfire echoed, wood splintered. Ruth ducked low, then grabbed Elias's spare rifle from the table. Her hands shook, but she aimed true, firing once. The bullet struck the dirt near Harlan's boots, forcing him back. A round tore across Elias's shoulder, hot pain burning, but he kept firing until the riders scattered, retreating into the dusk. The yard was quiet again, smoke drifting from Elias's rifle. Ruth stood beside him, shaking but alive. Together they had fought.
That night, Elias dragged the heap of chains into the yard. The metal clattered, heavy and hateful. Ruth stood near, her blanket wrapped tight. He set the wooden board on top, the one that bore the words, "Betrayal never sleeps." Striking a match, Elias held it for a moment, the flame trembling. Then he tossed it onto the pile. Fire caught slow, then roared, licking across iron and wood. The sign burned first. The carved words curled inward, blackened, then vanished into smoke. Elias stared, chest heaving, as if years of weight were turning to ash. Ruth's eyes reflected the flames. She stepped closer, her voice low but certain. "My name isn't Ruth, it's Ilara." Elias looked at her, then nodded once. "Ilara," he said, letting the name settle like truth on his tongue. The fire burned low, but the chains glowed red, warping under the heat. For the first time, the ranch felt lighter, as if something had finally let go. Ilara stood beside him, closer now, and whispered, "We're not theirs anymore."
By morning, the decision was clear. They couldn't stay. Word would spread. More men would come. Elias saddled 2 horses, his shoulder bound but steady enough to ride. Ilara packed what little food they had, her movements quiet but sure. At the edge of the yard, Elias paused, taking one last look at the ranch. It had been his safe place, his prison, his world. Now it was just walls and memories. They rode out under the rising sun, the desert stretching wide before them. For miles, neither spoke. The land was harsh, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared. By a river crossing, Ilara stopped.
From her pocket, she pulled one broken link of chain, the last piece she had kept. She held it for a moment, then threw it into the water. The current carried it away, swallowed by the flow. Elias watched her, his heart tightening. She turned to him, eyes clear. "Betrayal never sleeps," she said softly. Then she added, with strength, "But neither does hope." Elias reached for her hand. Together, they rode south, two wounded souls chasing a chance at freedom.